History is supposed to move forward. Stone tools become bronze, bronze becomes iron, villages become cities. Knowledge accumulates generation by generation in a slow and understandable climb. That is the story we tell ourselves. But occasionally, history breaks its own rules. In the early hours of a quiet excavation, archaeologists uncovered stone structures that should not have been there, not because they were crude, but because they were too precise, too deliberate, too organized for the age they were dated to. These were not random piles of rock, they were planned, massive blocks shaped with intent, alignments that suggested geometry, layouts that implied social coordination, shared belief, and long-term vision. Whoever built this place understood something about space, about structure, about cooperation, that history says they should not have known yet. The dates only made it worse. Carbon analysis pushed the site deeper into the past than expected, far deeper, into a time when humans were supposedly small groups of nomadic hunter-gatherers struggling simply to survive, a time before agriculture, before cities, before complex society. And yet here was evidence of all three. No kings, no written language, no metal tools, and still monumental construction. This discovery did not rewrite history overnight. Instead, it created something far more uncomfortable, a silence. Textbooks hesitated, academic papers softened their language. Words like anomalous, unexpected, and poorly understood began to appear more frequently. The site was real. The dates were real. The problem was interpretation. Because if this civilization truly existed when the evidence suggested, then the timeline of human development was wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally wrong. The deeper researchers looked, the stranger the picture became. The architecture suggested advanced planning, not trial and error. The orientation of structures hinted at astronomical awareness. The labor required implied social organization on a scale previously thought impossible for that era. And then came the most troubling question of all. Why did it disappear? There was no clear evidence of war, no mass graves, no signs of violent destruction. Instead, the site appeared to have been deliberately buried, as if those who built it chose to erase it. Stones covered with soil, structures sealed away, knowledge hidden rather than destroyed. Civilizations usually leave traces of collapse, chaos, fire, abandonment. This one left intentional silence, and it was not alone. As researchers compared findings from other regions, a pattern began to emerge. Scattered across the ancient world were hints of societies that seemed to rise too early, know too much, and vanish too completely. Not legends, not myths, physical evidence. Yet modern history struggles to speak about them clearly, because acknowledging their existence forces an unsettling possibility, that human progress is not a straight line, that knowledge can appear, vanish, and reappear, and that our civilization may not be as unique or as advanced as we believe. This documentary is not about rewriting history with speculation. It's about confronting what the evidence quietly suggests, that somewhere in the deep past, a civilization existed that does not fit the story we tell, and that the ruins it left behind are not just remnants of stone, but cracks in the timeline itself. The most unsettling part was not the size of the ruins, it was their order. Early human settlements are usually chaotic. Structures grow organically, shaped by immediate needs rather than long-term planning. Paths form where people walk most often. Homes are rebuilt, expanded, abandoned, and rebuilt again. Disorder is the fingerprint of survival. But this site showed none of that. The layout was deliberate, purposeful, almost modern in its logic. Structures were positioned with clear intent, separated by defined spaces aligned along consistent axes. There was no evidence of gradual expansion, no layers of trial and error. It was as if the entire complex had been envisioned before the first stone was placed. This implies something radical. Planning. Planning requires foresight. Foresight requires stability. Stability requires food surplus, coordination, and shared goals. According to conventional history, none of these should have existed yet. At the time this civilization was dated to, humans were believed to be small, mobile groups. Temporary shelters, short-term thinking, life organized around seasons and survival, not architecture and symbolism. And yet the builders of this site were not improvising. They were executing a design. Even more puzzling was what wasn't found. There were no palaces, no clear signs of ruling elites, no monuments glorifying individuals. Instead, the structures appeared communal, places of gathering rather than domination. This was not a city built around power, it was built around purpose. The scale of construction raised another problem: labor. Moving stones of this size without metal tools requires coordination on a massive scale. Hundreds, possibly thousands of individuals working together over long periods of time. Not coerced labor, but organized labor. Shared belief, shared motivation. Why would a supposedly primitive society invest such effort? They were not building homes. They were building something symbolic, something that mattered enough to justify decades of work. Archaeologists began to notice patterns carved into the stone, abstract forms, repeated motifs, figures that suggested meaning rather than decoration. These were not random markings. They were part of a visual language. But no written records existed, which means whatever knowledge guided this civilization was transmitted orally, ritually, or visually, not through text. That alone challenges modern assumptions. We often equate writing with intelligence, but here was intelligence without script, complexity without literature. This civilization understood geometry without equations, astronomy without charts, social order without law codes. And then there was the timing. This society appeared fully formed, with no clear ancestors, no transitional stages, no obvious predecessors experimenting and failing. It simply appeared advanced, coordinated, confident. History does not like sudden appearances. Evolution prefers slow change. So does archaeology. When something emerges without warning, scholars become cautious. Language grows careful. Interpretations become conservative. Not because evidence is lacking, but because the implications are uncomfortable. Because if this civilization truly existed as early as the evidence suggests, then everything that follows must be reconsidered. Agriculture may not have caused civilization. Religion may not have followed society. Cities may not be the result of surplus, but the reason for it. The past begins to look less like a ladder and more like a loop. As the structures were studied more closely, the mystery shifted from what was built to how it was conceived. Because building is not just physical labor, it is applied knowledge. Angles were consistent. Distances were measured. Symmetry appeared where symmetry served no practical purpose. Certain alignments repeated across the site, not randomly, but precisely. This suggested an understanding of geometry that went beyond intuition. Someone had calculated, not with numbers written on paper, but with mental models, shared rules, and inherited technique. This civilization possessed a way to measure space reliably, a system of proportion that allowed different builders across time to produce the same results. That alone raises a critical problem. Measurement systems do not emerge overnight. They require standardization, agreement, teaching, correction. They imply generations of refinement, yet archaeology finds no long developmental trail leading up to this moment. The knowledge appears fully formed. Even more unsettling were the celestial hints. Several structures appear oriented toward specific points on the horizon, not just toward the rising or setting sun, something many cultures observe, but toward positions that change slowly over centuries. These alignments suggest long-term observation of the sky. To track such movements, one must think in decades, in lifetimes, possibly longer. This means the builders were not only engineers, they were astronomers. But astronomy requires patience. It requires records, memory, and comparison. It requires the ability to say, this is where the sky was, and this is where it is now. Without writing, how was this knowledge preserved? The answer may lie in ritual. Many of the structures show signs that they were not lived in. No hearths, no trash pits, no everyday tools. These were not domestic spaces, they were gathering spaces, used periodically, intentionally. Places where knowledge could be encoded in ceremony rather than text. Stories repeated, movements rehearsed, symbols carved, cycles remembered through action rather than writing. In such systems, memory becomes architecture, and architecture becomes memory. This reframes the civilization entirely. They were not trying to dominate land, they were trying to preserve meaning. And then there is the craftsmanship. The stonework shows consistency in depth, curvature, and spacing, achieved without metal tools. This requires an understanding of material properties, of force, of fracture, of patience. Mistakes would have been costly, irreversible, which means mistakes were rare. This was not experimental construction. It was confident execution. At this point, archaeologists face a dilemma. Either this civilization inherited knowledge from an earlier unknown source, or our assumptions about early human capability are deeply flawed. Neither option is comfortable, because the first suggests a deeper hidden past, and the second suggests that intelligence does not depend on technology the way we think it does. That complex thought can exist without cities, that advanced understanding can exist without writing, that history may have underestimated the human mind. The more the evidence accumulates, the harder it becomes to dismiss. This civilization did not stumble into complexity. It arrived with it. And that forces a question we rarely ask. What else might we have forgotten? Not because it never existed, but because it left no map for us to follow. Every civilization we understand has a beginning. There are crude tools before refined ones, simple shelters before complex buildings, mistakes before mastery. Archaeology is built on this assumption. Progress leaves footprints, but here, the footprints stop. There are no earlier villages slowly evolving into this place, no primitive versions of the structures, no experimental failures buried beneath later success. The civilization does not appear to grow, it appears complete. This absence is not subtle, it is glaring. Normally, archaeologists can trace cultural development through layers, each generation improving slightly on the last. Here, the layers are thin. The leap is too large. The sophistication arrives without warning. This is what troubles historians most. Not that the civilization was advanced, but that it has no visible childhood, which forces uncomfortable possibilities. Perhaps earlier sites existed but were destroyed. Perhaps they lie underwater. Perhaps they were built from materials that did not survive. Or perhaps something else happened. Because this is not the only place where history shows a sudden leap. Again and again, the archaeological record reveals moments where human capability seems to jump forward without explanation, as if knowledge reappeared rather than evolved, as if something lost had been remembered. This idea is dangerous. It suggests that civilization may not be a single upward climb, but a series of rises and resets, that human knowledge can collapse completely, leaving only fragments behind. If that is true, then this civilization may not have been the first of its kind. It may have been a survivor, but survival does not guarantee continuity. When societies collapse, knowledge does not vanish evenly. Practical skills may persist while abstract understanding disappears. Rituals remain, but their meaning fades. Structures are reused, but their purpose is forgotten. What we see here could be the echo of something older, a culture that inherited ideas without fully understanding their origin, that executed techniques passed down through tradition rather than innovation, that knew how without remembering why. This would explain the confidence without experimentation, the precision without theory, the mastery without visible development, and it would explain the silence. Because if knowledge was inherited orally, ritually, architecturally, then once the chain broke, it broke completely. No text to copy, no manuals to preserve, no equations to rediscover, only stone. Stone does not explain itself. At some point, the builders stopped coming, not gradually, not chaotically. They stopped with intention. Structures were left intact. Tools were not scattered in panic. There is no evidence of desperation. Whatever ended this civilization did not feel like an emergency. It felt like a decision. This suggests awareness, an understanding that something was ending, that continuation was no longer possible or no longer desired. History prefers collapses driven by famine, war, disaster. They are easier to explain. But this ending resists those narratives. It is too quiet, too clean, which leads to the most disturbing possibility yet, that this civilization did not collapse because it failed, but because the conditions that allowed it to exist no longer did. And if that is true, then civilization may be more fragile than we are willing to admit. At some point, knowledge stops being a solution and starts becoming a risk. This civilization understood how to organize people, shape stone, and preserve meaning across generations. But knowledge does not exist in isolation. It depends on environment, stability, and continuity. Remove any one of those, and even the most advanced understanding can become useless. Archaeological evidence suggests that the builders were operating within a delicate balance. Their structures required long-term cooperation. Their knowledge depended on memory and ritual. Their society functioned because conditions allowed patience, coordination, and trust. These are not permanent features of human existence. They are fragile states. A shift in climate, a breakdown in social cohesion, a loss of shared belief. Any one of these can unravel everything. What makes this civilization unique is not that it collapsed, but how quickly its knowledge vanished. Normally, when societies decline, their tools remain, skills degrade slowly, techniques survive in altered form. But here, the advanced understanding disappears almost completely. Later cultures in the same regions did not inherit the same precision. They did not replicate the same structures. They did not continue the same traditions. Whatever was known here was not gradually diluted, it was abruptly severed. This implies a dangerous truth. Some forms of knowledge are not robust. They cannot survive disruption. They require constant reinforcement. Once the chain breaks, reconstruction becomes impossible without starting over. This is especially true for knowledge that is not written down. Writing creates redundancy. It allows ideas to be rediscovered even after interruption. Oral and ritual-based systems are powerful, but brittle. They function perfectly until they fail completely. If this civilization relied on living memory rather than records, then its end would not look like destruction. It would look like disappearance. And that is exactly what we see. No successor culture picks up where they left off. No gradual evolution carries their ideas forward. The advanced elements simply stop, which raises a deeply unsettling implication. Perhaps this civilization knew this vulnerability. Perhaps they understood that their knowledge could not survive disruption, that whatever they had built required conditions that were no longer guaranteed. If so, then burying their structures may not have been an act of fear, but of preservation, sealing knowledge away, protecting it from misuse, or accepting that it could not be carried forward safely. This reframes the ruins not as failures, but as deliberate endpoints, markers of a civilization that understood its own limits. Modern societies often assume that advancement equals security, that more technology, more data, more complexity makes collapse less likely. History suggests the opposite. The more intricate a system becomes, the more points of failure it contains. The more specialized knowledge becomes, the fewer people can maintain it. Collapse does not need to be violent. It only needs to interrupt the flow. This civilization may have reached a level of complexity that could not survive change. And if that is true, then the lesson is not about the past, it is about us. Because the ruins are not asking how advanced were they. They are asking something far more uncomfortable. What kind of knowledge can actually endure? Most civilizations end loudly. Walls are breached, cities burn, mass graves fill the ground. History remembers these moments because they leave scars, visible, dramatic, undeniable. But this civilization did not end that way. There are no signs of invasion, no weapons scattered in panic, no layers of ash marking destruction, no evidence of famine severe enough to cause chaos. The end does not announce itself, it simply happens. Structures remain standing, stonework is intact. The site shows care, not collapse. This is not the signature of a society overwhelmed by sudden disaster. It is the signature of withdrawal. People did not flee, they stopped coming. This distinction matters, because abandonment implies choice. Something changed, not in a single day, but decisively enough that the system could no longer sustain itself. The knowledge that held everything together stopped being transmitted. Rituals were no longer performed. Coordination dissolved. And without those things, the civilization could not continue. What could cause this kind of ending? Climate is one possibility. Subtle environmental shifts can undermine societies without producing immediate catastrophe. A slight change in rainfall patterns, a gradual loss of reliable food sources, enough to disrupt long-term planning, but not enough to force mass death. Another possibility is social fragmentation. Civilizations built on shared meaning are powerful, but vulnerable. If belief erodes, if trust breaks down, if the reason for cooperation disappears, the structures become empty shells. Stones do not move themselves. Knowledge does not transmit itself. Without consensus, complexity collapses inward. There is also the possibility of success becoming its own enemy. As societies grow more advanced, they often specialize. Knowledge becomes distributed among fewer people. Systems become interdependent. Efficiency increases, resilience decreases. A single broken link can end everything. And then there is the most unsettling idea of all, that this civilization recognized the approaching failure and chose not to resist it, that they understood their way of life could not survive the coming conditions, that preservation was no longer possible, that continuation would mean distortion. And so they stopped. They did not try to rebuild elsewhere. They did not simplify their system. They did not pass everything on. They let it end cleanly. If this sounds strange, it is because modern civilization rarely considers intentional endings. We assume survival at all costs, progress without pause, expansion as default. But earlier societies may have understood something we do not, that not all knowledge should persist unchanged, that some systems are only valid within specific conditions, that forcing continuity can be more destructive than allowing closure. This reframes the silence left behind. It is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of restraint. The builders may have known that their civilization was an anomaly, a convergence of rare conditions unlikely to repeat. And when those conditions faded, they accepted the outcome. What remains then are not ruins of ambition, but fossils of understanding. A reminder that advancement is not permanent, that intelligence does not guarantee survival, and that the most dangerous assumption any civilization can make is believing it is immune to forgetting. As researchers stepped back from this single site, an unsettling realization began to take shape. This was not unique. Across different continents and different eras, archaeology reveals the same strange pattern. Moments where complexity appears too early, knowledge seems out of place, and disappearance happens without clear explanation. Not identical civilizations, but structurally similar anomalies. Sites with unexpected precision, societies with organization beyond what their tools suggest. Knowledge that appears briefly, then vanishes. Individually, these cases are treated as exceptions, outliers, curiosities, each explained away with local factors, incomplete data, or cautionary language. But taken together, they form something harder to dismiss, a pattern. History, as it is usually taught, prefers clean narratives, linear progress, clear causes and effects. But real evidence is rarely that cooperative. It accumulates unevenly, leaving gaps that resist closure. And those gaps are often where the most important questions hide. In multiple cases, advanced techniques appear without clear developmental pathways. Monumental architecture emerges before widespread agriculture. Astronomical knowledge appears without written systems. Social coordination predates centralized authority. These contradictions are not speculative, they are documented. What is debated is not whether they exist, but what they mean. One explanation is convergence, that human minds, given similar challenges, independently arrive at similar solutions. This is reasonable, but it does not explain the timing, nor does it explain the sudden loss. Another explanation is incomplete evidence, that earlier stages existed but were erased by time. This is possible, but it cannot account for the consistency of the phenomenon across regions. At some point, coincidence becomes pattern, and patterns demand interpretation. The emerging picture suggests that civilization may not be a single invention, but a recurring state, one that appears when conditions align and disappears when they no longer do. If so, then what we call the first civilization may simply be the first one we remember. This is deeply uncomfortable, because it implies that human intelligence has always been capable of far more than we assume, and that what limits civilization is not cognition, but continuity. Knowledge is not a permanent achievement. It is a process that must be maintained. Break the process, and even the most sophisticated understanding can evaporate within generations. This perspective reframes ancient anomalies not as mysteries to be solved, but as warnings to be understood. They tell us that civilization is not guaranteed by intelligence alone, that organization, meaning, and shared purpose matter just as much as tools or technology. And they tell us something else, that forgetting is easy. Once knowledge is lost, it does not announce its absence. It simply stops appearing. Future generations grow up without knowing what once existed and build new explanations on top of incomplete foundations. By the time questions arise, the context is gone. This may be why history feels stable only in retrospect. In reality, it is fragile, selective, full of blind spots. And if the past truly contains multiple forgotten rises and falls, then the most dangerous assumption we can make is believing that this time is different, because every civilization that vanished likely believed the same thing. When evidence refuses to fit a narrative, history often responds with restraint, not denial, but distance. Academic language grows cautious, conclusions are softened, certainty is replaced with phrases like poorly understood, ritual purpose unknown, and anomalous for its time. This is not deception, it is discipline. Scholars are trained to avoid speculation where data is incomplete. But restraint has a side effect. It creates silence. The public encounters ruins without context. Discoveries are announced, then quietly archived. The uncomfortable questions are postponed, not because they are unimportant, but because they resist clean answers. This is especially true for civilizations that leave no texts. Writing anchors history. It provides names, dates, and tensions. Without it, interpretation becomes inference, and inference makes historians uneasy. Stones can show what existed, but rarely why. And yet, absence of explanation is itself a form of information. The lack of records here is not random. It is systematic. No inscriptions claiming power, no chronicles celebrating rulers, no evidence of expansionist ideology. The silence is consistent with a society that did not seek legacy through domination or permanence, which is profoundly different from most civilizations we know. This creates a paradox. We are trying to understand a society that did not define itself the way we define civilization today. It did not prioritize writing, conquest, or continuity. Its values may have centered on presence rather than permanence, meaning rather than memory. If so, then history's difficulty is not that evidence is missing. It is that our framework is mismatched. Modern historical analysis is built to understand states, empires, and institutions. It struggles with cultures that organize around ritual, knowledge transmission, and shared purpose rather than hierarchy. So the silence persists, not because nothing happened, but because what happened does not translate easily into our categories. This is why these civilizations remain on the margins of textbooks, not hidden, but unresolved, not denied, but unsettled. They challenge the assumption that progress always accumulates. They challenge the belief that writing is the only path to memory. They challenge the idea that civilization must seek permanence to be real. In doing so, they expose a deeper vulnerability. History is not just a record of what happened. It is a record of what we know how to recognize. Everything else risks being forgotten twice, once by those who lived it, and again by those who come after. If this civilization chose not to leave a voice, then silence may have been part of its design. And if so, the question is no longer why don't we know more? It is, what kinds of civilizations are we incapable of remembering? Why this story is about us. It is tempting to treat this civilization as an anomaly, a curiosity locked safely in the past. But the longer we examine it, the harder that distance becomes to maintain. Because the conditions that allowed it to exist are not alien. They are familiar. Coordination, shared belief, long-term thinking, knowledge transmitted through trust rather than storage. A society held together not by force, but by meaning. These are not primitive traits. They are fragile ones. Modern civilization prides itself on durability. We store knowledge in databases, encoded in machines, replicated across continents in seconds. We assume this guarantees continuity. History suggests otherwise. The more complex a system becomes, the more invisible its dependencies grow. We no longer understand most of what sustains us. We trust it. Few people know how electricity grids function. Fewer still understand global supply chains, data infrastructure, or the mathematics that underpins modern technology. We are advanced, but we are also narrow. Knowledge today is deep but concentrated, specialized, abstracted away from daily life. This makes it powerful and vulnerable. When systems fail, understanding does not trickle down, it collapses. The civilization we have been examining may have understood this intuitively. Their knowledge was embodied, lived, performed. It required participation. But that also meant it could not survive fragmentation. Once the social fabric loosened, the knowledge dissolved with it. We face the opposite risk. Our knowledge survives, but our connection to it weakens. If this civilization vanished because its knowledge could not endure disruption, we must ask a harder question. What happens when knowledge survives, but understanding does not? What happens when systems continue to run, but no one remembers how to rebuild them? From a distance, collapse always looks sudden. But from the inside, it feels like normality stretching just a little too thin. The ancient builders likely did not wake up one day and decide to end their world. The conditions simply shifted. Small failures accumulated, transmission faltered, purpose diluted. And then, one generation later, the chain was gone. That is how forgetting happens, not with catastrophe, but with continuity that quietly breaks. This is why the ruins feel unsettling. They do not warn us with violence. They do not scream. They whisper. They remind us that intelligence is not enough. That technology is not memory. That civilization is not guaranteed by advancement. And they suggest something even more uncomfortable, that our era too may one day be reduced to fragments, interpreted by future minds trying to understand how something so complex could vanish so completely, not because it failed, but because it forgot how to continue. One segment remains, and it asks the question history rarely dares to ask directly. Not what happened to them, but what makes any civilization deserve to last. The final lesson history leaves behind: civilizations rarely believe they are temporary. They build monuments to permanence, systems designed to outlast individuals, stories meant to carry meaning forward indefinitely. Each era assumes it has finally solved the problem of continuity, and each era is eventually proven wrong. The civilization we have traced through fragments and silence did not fail because it lacked intelligence. It did not vanish because it was primitive. In many ways, it understood organization, cooperation, and knowledge more deeply than societies that came long after it. What it lacked was immunity to forgetting. This is the uncomfortable truth history keeps revealing. Progress is not a straight line. It is not guaranteed, and it is not cumulative by default. Knowledge can appear suddenly and disappear just as quietly, not destroyed, not rejected, simply no longer carried forward. Once the chain of transmission breaks, even the most advanced understanding becomes inaccessible. The ruins we find are not warnings carved in stone. They are byproducts of silence. They tell us that civilization is not defined by how much it knows, but by how well it preserves meaning across change. That survival is not about reaching a peak, but about maintaining continuity through disruption. This civilization may have understood something we struggle to accept: that endurance requires simplicity, that complexity demands constant care, and that not all knowledge survives transition. Perhaps they recognized that their way of life could not exist under new conditions, that forcing continuation would distort what they had built, and so they allowed it to end, cleanly, deliberately, without chaos. If that is true, then their disappearance is not a failure. It is a decision. Modern civilization resists this idea fiercely. We equate survival with success, expansion with progress, permanence with value. But history offers a colder perspective. Nothing lasts by default. Not empires, not knowledge, not even understanding. Each generation must choose to carry meaning forward, actively, intentionally. Without that choice, systems hollow out while appearances remain intact. This is why the past feels stable only in hindsight. In reality, it is fragile. The civilization that shouldn't have existed forces us to confront a question we rarely ask, because the answer is unsettling. What if we are not the peak of history, but another phase? What if the future looks back on us the way we look back on them, through fragments, gaps, and unanswered questions? The ruins do not accuse us. They do not predict our end. They simply remind us of a rule older than civilization itself, that intelligence is common, that continuity is rare, and that forgetting is always closer than we think. History does not end, it resets.